Okay, today on the Film Situation podcast, we're so pleased, so honored to have Bill Fishman, director of such films as the legendary 1988 cult classic film Tapeheads with John Cusack and Tib Robbins, 1994's Car 54, Where Are You? A super impressive roster of music videos of such bands as the Ramones, Suicidal Tendencies, Counting Crows, and countless others, and most recently, Waltzing with Brando, a biopic about a specific chapter of Marlon Brando's, largely set in Tahiti, starring Billy Zane, which recently premiered at the Torino Film Festival. Welcome, Bill.
Welcome. Thanks. You just encapsulated it.
So I guess let's talk Waltzing with Brando. The film is, I guess, largely set in Tahiti and based on the memoir of Bernard Judge, who was an architect that was brought on for building a totally sustainable, eco-friendly hotel. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And basically, I guess in 1969, Bernard Judge was basically plucked out of his staid and stable existence in Los Angeles by an unknown client to go to Tahiti and build a resort. And once he was there, he embarked on a 6-year journey with the most famous man in the world, Marlon Brando, to build this, then cutting edge dream of Marlon Brando's, which was a compound on a totally uninhabitable atoll in the South Pacific in Tahiti that Marlon had bought. And he wanted to live there himself and contemplate the world's, problems in a pristine environment. And he thought that was that would be the answer to solving some of the world's most difficult problems. Sit in paradise and get the greatest minds on the planet to come and figure it out. But they had to figure out how to build this thing.
Like anything else, I guess it was easier said than done, right?
Easier said than done, and that's what the film is about.
Yeah, and starring Billy Zane, which, first of all, I got a chance to watch the film last week and loved it. And one thing that struck me, of course, is how much Billy Zane not only just looked like Brando in the film, but definitely personified him in a way that was very grounded and nuanced and authentic, which I loved his performance as Brando.
It's remarkable because we thought we were going to need a lot of makeup and prosthetics and such to create the illusion of Marlon Brando, and we did. We got Brando's life mask that was made, I think, around that time for Superman. So where they scanned the face and they created a representation, a full sculpture of his head, and then you could then create prosthetics that would match exactly, and it was a big help. And we spent a lot of time and energy creating these prosthetics to apply to his nose, to his face, a wig which Diana Choi created, which was phenomenal, to recreate the hairline and the hair. And then as we started working, we started pulling away all the things we created, all the appliances, and which the actor has to act through, and you're watching it. And in the end, we really ended up with a little bit on the nose, that wig, and that was basically it. The rest was Billy's nuances and his physical resemblance.
That's amazing. I never really thought about before this movie that he really does sort of resemble him, in a way. I never like really considered that before.
Yeah, I mean, he's been saying that, people have been telling him that his whole life, and he was really looking, askance at that at times. It's obviously daunting to say, you, you resemble Marlon Brando, and then that, and I think we came upon a period of his life, and it happened to coincide with the period that I was creating for the film, where the two aligned, and it's remarkable. His performance is really remarkable, I think, in the film.
Yeah, it really is, and it's so easy to fuck that up, for for lack of a better term, because it's like it's so difficult to pull it off where it's not just like a total imitation or like a caricature, and I felt like, kind of similar to when I was watching Walk the Line and you're watching Joaquin Phoenix, like personify Johnny Cash. And I was like really skeptical before that movie came out. And I thought they did a great job, with that film. And then,
Yeah, I mean, I think in the same way, and that's a good example, and there are others, but when you have somebody that's that recognizable and has that many, quirks, and there's a habit of going into an imitation, and so I think Billy embraced this, but whenever I had the chance, I would say to him, don't worry about his voice, or don't worry about I mean, it was always in the back of his mind, but just play it, for real, and I think that's the way Brando would approach roles anyway, so just by sort of forgetting it, just by living it, it allowed him to create a nuanced performance, and versus an imitation.
nice. And what was your sort of preparation like with Billy Zane in general?
Well, I mean, we did some preparation, uh, with a voice coach, with ta- analyzing the physicality. Uh, a lot of it was more than than just what you see in the film. You see Brando, on film, he would be playing a character, so there would be that. In interviews, Brando was always very mannered. He was very concerned about how he was putting forth his interviews. So that was one thing to recreate. And the performances in films like, Godfather, and Last Tango, and some of the other films that we recreated, those we recreated. I mean, we got every nuance and the lighting and everything as accurate as we could. But then we wanted to show what was going on behind it. So there was always we were always conscious that we were, meta, that we were in the film, that we were shooting. But for the most part, this film, we relied on anecdotal stories from the real Bernard Judge, from other people who we interviewed that had spent time with Brando, from um, family members, and we wanted to create the Brando that was real, that only his friends saw, and he had very few of them. That called him Bud, and when he was out on the island, he could be himself. He could, and who was that guy? And his humor and his playfulness, because at this point of his life, Marlon had been through, 7 lifetimes of a normal, actor or person, and he had really been disillusioned with Hollywood and artifice and the amount of attention he received, and way people put him up on a platform, and he never felt worthy of any of that attention. What he did want to do is get to the essence. He wanted to get to like be himself and be okay with being himself. And there in Tahiti, he was. He was not, he wasn't the biggest movie star in the world. He was just, a guy, in a bathing suit and a hat, walking around the beach, or, drinking, a Mai Tai, and, or looking at, the ocean, and, having friends, and starting a new family. And so these were things that were concerned with him. And that's what that was our preparation, was like, hey, how would he be when he wasn't, on camera?
No, yeah, for sure. I think you guys captured that vibe really well, and I liked John Heder's performance in it. Is it Heder or Heder? I don't know, like if I'm pronouncing.
That's a good question. He would always correct me, so we'll have to ask him when we see him.
Yeah, but yeah,
I always say John Heder, but I think he may take issue with that.
Gotcha.
John was great casting in this, because we tried to have some fun with Bernie's character, and John is not known for more serious acting, and he's a really good serious actor, and a smart guy and a smart actor, and but has a playful side, has a quirky, offbeat side that I wanted to, embrace. And I thought that the idea of having this, this character that's out of his element, so to speak, and he sees himself as, as a competent, intelligent, thoughtful architect dealing with the world's problems, and the problems, the engineering struggles and stuff that architects always deal with, as well as their creative struggles and abilities to overcome them in a meaningful way for the project. But yet he's dealing with now a figure that's a father figure, a friend. He feels like in some ways that he is now the equal of Marlon Brando, because he gets in over his skis and decides that he's going to become the Marlon Brando of architecture, and he's going to create this monumental project. And so I wanted someone who could easily sort of get carried away with it, and I thought that that was great casting, because John could embrace that.
For sure. I think he had a great character arc as well. Like he definitely loosened up. It seemed like he was like pretty serious in the beginning of the movie, and that's part of his character journey too, I think. He seemed competent, except that he just seemed like he couldn't say no to Marlon when he was like, just get it done, sort of things. Like, but that's not a good idea. And he just didn't have the ability to put his foot down and be like, no, that can't be done that way.
It was constantly a balancing act where he took on a project before its time. It was not a lot of people were talking about building, sustainably and, in harmony with the earth, but using the most modern technology to achieve that at that time. Now, the time has come, now we have tools to do this. and we still don't do it, you know. But back then, this was another, you know, crazy dream that, you know, crazy that that was before its time, and he said yes, you know, without knowing how to do it,
Right, what it
and
entails, yeah.
and then he had his own, so that so he was caught up in the, you know, excitement of it, but you know, trying to figure out the answers with Marlon was kind of what the film is about, and you know, and it's interesting how the two personalities, you know, clash and mesh.
Yeah. Kind of a metaphor too for filmmaking, right?
It seemed that way. Yep, yep. And making this film, it was definitely, you know, we went through all kinds of things. Right? Should we shoot the whole thing, you know, CG and on a stage and in LA, and, you know, create, you know, we could create it, or, you know, do we want to go back to the real location, really on Tetiaroa, really in Tahiti and Moorea, and, you know, and actually go through trying to bring film equipment and crew and, you know, house people and try to get it done with, you know, you know, the tools that we have. And so we were always playing around with that, but I ended up saying, oh, let's take a journey just like Bernie and Marlon did, and let's just try to make it in the real places with the real, you know, with the real Tahitians, and, you know, see
Amazing.
if we can do it. Yeah.
So how did this project first come to you? Was it something you had a personal connection to, or were you approached because of your unique style?
No, not really. It came to me in a way that, you know, most projects come to me, but you know, it's kind of through the ether. I was looking for, I can't remember. I was looking for something on Amazon, and I hit the wrong button, and I saw the book Waltzing with Brando, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. I never knew about that, and I purchased it and got it, and it sat on my coffee table for a year. It's got great photos, and, you know, it was just sitting there, and um, one day I kind of looked down again, and I was like, you know, there's a movie in here. Because the book isn't a narrative arc in any way, shape, or form. It's really just a memoir of, you know, of technical issues and, you know, memories that would, you know, that came up when they were trying to build this compound. So, and with great photos, but there was no narrative arc or story arc. And I worked for a long while actually, trying to figure out, you know, do we want to create a narrative within it, you know, and come up with, invent stuff, you know, pirates come and, you know, kidnap them. And I mean, you know, there's all kinds of dramatic arcs that you could put in, and, you know, to make it read more like a film. But in the end, I thought, you know what, this is way more humorous than than Bernie realizes when he put this very dry, you know, book together of memories. And I thought, well, you know what, it's all right there. And so by, you know, creating a sort of a the narrative interplay between the two characters, you know, you had everything you needed for a great film, a gentle film, a film that is enjoyable, agreeable, you know, and it's all could take the viewer on a kind of a once in a lifetime journey that I enjoy seeing in movies, and that I think sometimes we've lost in filmmaking today.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And first of all, I love that story of how the project came about. That I wasn't expecting that. I thought you were going to say something like, "Oh, my agent told me about it," or Billy Zane's company told me about it. Like the fact that you just randomly bought that book on Amazon and you're like, you know what, this could be a film, and you developed it that way is amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and it really was when I thought this could be a film. I just it was really the setting and the location and the oddball characters that they described, I knew had the basis for something special, something different. Uh, so, writing it was another story. It took a long time. I kind of took my cue in one way from one of my favorite films, which is Doctor Strangelove. And I realized that that Kubrick had taken, this very dry manual about basically how the world was
Thermal
almost
nuclear
destroyed.
warfare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thermonuclear warfare, and and a guidebook for that as well, and worked on a very serious, analysis of it and drama for many years and how to approach it. And then he realized, look, the only way to do this is an absurd comedy because this is so absurd. This is so absurd that we almost destroy our planet, our life by doing that. So then he, and developed how the absurdity of it all. So I kind of went in that direction, and I originally titled the script, Waltzing with Brando, or how I learned to stop, what was it? Or how I learned to stop hating myself and love the world, or something, something like that. I had a working title like that would remind me.
Nice. I guess when is it coming out to general audiences?
Right. I mean, we're just, I mean, I'm literally just finishing it. I'm doing some more finishing touches, some small ones this week. But we should be ready. We're playing Palm Springs Film Festival in January, and we've played a couple. So we're ready to try to release it, and we don't know if we're going to be doing a small theatrical release, um, and then another more, whatever, streaming or releasing throughout, or exactly the plan. So we're right now looking at a good plan for that, but we're talking about trying to get some interest in having Billy Zane up for some Best Actor awards. And so right now we're taking it a little slow because we don't have a total plan of how to release it. But I would say by second quarter of next year we should be out.
Nice. And how did Billy Zane, did you know Billy before this film?
Yeah, I knew Billy. I actually met him when he first came to Hollywood uh, through his agent. I was at a party at his house, and I mean, at the agent's house, and they introduced me to Billy, and then he joined the Actors Gang, did some work with them. That was Tim Robbins' company, and I'd known Tim and John and then I was doing tape heads with them. So I knew all the way back to late '80s. I
Oh,
knew,
cool.
I knew
Yeah.
Billy, and then I produced a movie that I developed called Posse.
I
Um,
have a question about that later because
okay.
yeah, I saw that on your IMDb. And
And that film, Billy was, worked with Billy on that film with Catherine Hardwicke and Mario and all those actors and everything. And so worked with Billy at that time, and then knew him over the years. But I didn't actually note the resemblance either because I knew him,
Right.
and randomly I had finished the script and was thinking of, who to play Brando. So a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, are you still looking to cast Brando?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, I'm sitting across the pool from Billy Zane, and he looks exactly like Marlon Brando." And it just kind of hit me again, like, kind of like you said in the book, like, yeah, Billy, why didn't I think of that before? He looks so much like Brando. And I said, "Hey, put him on the phone. He's a friend of mine. I know him." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, okay." So he walked across the pool and said, "Hey, I got Bill Fishman on the phone. He's wants to talk to you." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And I said, "Hey, I'm doing a film about Marlon Brando, and my buddy says that you look just like Marlon Brando." And I agree. He's like, "Yeah, I do. I've always been told that, and I've always wanted to do, play him, but I never had you know, the right part of the life and the right story and everything like that." I said, "Well, I think I got the right one for you, so check it out." And then after he read it, he was like, "Hey, man, I want to do this, and let me help you, produce it, and I'm all in. This is really what I want to do. This period is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do." So we said, "Okay, cool."
That's amazing. That's awesome. Yeah, it was serendipitous, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely encourage audiences to check out Waltzing with Brando once it comes out. Again, I loved it. And congratulations, man. You pulled it off, because it's, speaking as a filmmaker, I know it's so, there's such a gravitational pull, I feel like, for something like that to not work, and for it to work is miraculous. So it's a testament to the talent that's involved on all of your parts. So you guys did it.
Well, I appreciate that, and yes, I do think that it's a crowd pleaser. It's a very unique film, but it's supposed to be the kind of one that you'll talk about, you'll remember, you'll enjoy going to see, you'll want to go visit Tahiti afterward.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like people will really enjoy this film.
It's funny. I forget who was on the podcast. I remember now. It was a cinematographer. I was like, "Hey, what would you want to do next?" He was like, "I would love to do something on like a tropical island." I was like, "I just saw this movie called Waltzing with Brando that took place in Tahiti." He's like, "Oh man, that's incredible." That's the kind of project I would love to work on.
Yeah, I think it was a lot more fun for everyone else but me because, they had days off and they could actually enjoy
Oh
it.
yeah,
Me, I was like
of course.
constantly,
Yeah, it's hectic the whole
working
time.
and, couldn't even take days off.
Right. But now it's encapsulated forever and ever. So that's the good thing, Once it's out there,
And I mean, I do want to go back and show the film to all the crew that made it there because the crew in Tahiti was phenomenal, but it was like half of the crew was from Tahiti, and we had to
Oh,
bring.
cool. Nice.
Yeah, it's not as easy as you think.
No, I don't never think it's easy. So let's talk tape heads.
Okay.
That was how I first really discovered your work. Aside from watching a lot of music videos when I was a kid, didn't realize at the time that you directed a good amount of them. But tape heads, for those unfamiliar, it's a comedy about two guys, Ivan and Josh. They're played by John Cusack and Tim Robbins, who transformed their dead-end jobs as security guards into a wildly unconventional music video production company called Video Aces. And their journey takes them through a bizarre world of eccentric clients, including washed-up musicians and corrupt politicians, as they balance their artistic aspirations and the absurd demands of the entertainment industry. Awesome movie. I think I first discovered the movie because I was like an early adopter of Netflix back in the day, like getting the discs in the mail and that kind of thing. And I think I rented like around like 2002 when I was in college. I rented Repo Man, and I feel like there's a spiritual connection between Repo Man and Tapeheads. Am I wrong about that?
Very much so. I mean, a lot of the crew was the same as Repo Man, and my first music video was for a band called Suicidal Tendencies, and it's a song called Institutionalized, which
Great
was,
song. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
which was in Repo Man. And I was walking through Venice, California, which was not like what it is now, with Google and all these other companies there and all that. It was very much a, bohemian surf town. And I saw a bunch of scripts in a garbage out in front. And one of them, and it said Repo Man on it. And I I walked upstairs and I saw the address was right upstairs. And so I walk up these steps and I carrying one of the scripts and I was like, hey, did you guys make this film Repo Man? And so I met Peter McCarthy, producer of it, and he said, yeah. I said, well, I'm doing a music video for the band Suicidal Tendencies, and they told me their song is in your movie Repo Man, and I want to know, do you have any money you could give me, to make this music video? And he said, nah, I don't got any money, but Universal's releasing the movie, so let's go try to get some money, And we went to Universal, and I remember that, just big, it was in the tower there, and I was young, I was 21 years old or whatever, and I thought, okay, this is my big break, and because they were interested, they're like, yeah, we could promote the movie, and so I sit down and I go, okay, this is, I got this idea and this is what I want to do. And, and we could use, the film, we could promote it. And I remember the executive there was like, great, I love it. Let's do it. This is amazing. And I go, okay, great. How much money are you going to give me? And he goes, nothing. And I said, nothing? Wait, you mean no money? And he's like, yeah, they gave me no money to promote this film, so I'm totally into it, go do it, and you get no money. And I walked and I walked out, I was like, Pete, man, what was that? Like, the guy he ended up complaining to us, like, hey, he loves the movie, and Universal's giving him no money to promote it, and I said, well, I guess, I could just still, cut in parts of the film because they said I could do that, And Pete was like, yeah, fuck them, don't, you don't need it, just make it without us, and like, if they're not going to put up any money, don't, don't even put the film in. So I said, okay. So that's why you see in the video, there's like all this generic stuff, with the blue stripe. And that was kind of my homage to the scenes in Repo Man, but I didn't, I ended up not using any of the footage and just doing the video, ourselves. And, but that started me and Pete, our relationship. And then I had written Tapeheads with two other writers. And then I brought it to Pete, and Pete was like, hey, you and me rewrite it. And, so we rewrote it, and then we brought it to Michael Nesmith, who was one of the Monkees and had a film company and had produced Repo Man. And he's like, yeah, I invented music videos. I want to do this. And he brought it to Brandon Tartikoff. And I mean, we got financing for the movie, the week after we finished, it was crazy, through Michael. So it's the same DNA. A lot of the crew you know.
That's pretty cool. And I actually like it better than Repo Man, to be honest. uh, it was referred to me because I remember renting the DVD of Repo Man and liking that. And then it was like, if you like this, try this other movie, Tapeheads. And I was like, what is this? And, you know, then I discovered that. I was like, whoa, this is even better, you know? So that's pretty cool. Brandon Tartikoff, he was the head of NBC, right? Or
He was the head of NBC at the time, and he was, you know, he wanted to make movies. You know, he loved TV, but he also wanted to make movies.
is he the guy that Bob Balaban played his character on Seinfeld?
Oh,
I think
I
so.
mean, I never heard that, but it sounds.
Was he involved in Seinfeld? Was he involved in?
He did. I think he was the one that. I think he. Yeah, I think he's signed Seinfeld. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think in the show Seinfeld, when they're making the show about the show, I think Bob Balaban played his character. I could be mistaken by that, but I'm almost.
Oh, maybe. I mean, Brandon. I mean, I went to his funeral, and you'd never seen so many people. You know, such a big Hollywood, you know, premiere as his funeral. I mean, you know, it was standing room only, cars I mean, it was packed, and it was like he was just really well loved by, I think, everyone he worked with, and he's by far the best executive I've ever worked with. And I had no idea that it was going to go precipitously down after I thought, oh, so everybody is that great, you know, but but they weren't. He was really a unique guy who actually listened. Like he was the president of NBC, which was, you know, even bigger at that time, you know, without, you know, streaming and whatever, you know, just and he's like, I want to go over your script with you, you know, and we're like, oh, okay. And he's like, come over to my house at lunch or 10 o'clock in the morning or something, you know. And he'd moved from New York to LA, so he lived in a big house, I remember, but there was like not much furniture, and you know, and we thought it was gonna be like an hour meeting or 2 hours, but like after 2 hours, his wife comes out with, okay, who wants sandwiches? And like, you know, brought in sandwiches I'm looking at Pete, like, how long are we gonna be here? And we were there for like 6 hours. I mean, with the president of NBC not taking any calls. I mean, there was not a phone around. It was just us. And he was like, okay, on the next page. And we went through every page of the script, and he asked questions like, you know, why does he say this? Or, you know, what is this character, you know, what is Josh saying here, or why? And I would kind of be like, well, he's, you know, he's thinking to himself. And then like kind of a light bulb goes off in his head, and that's why he's not that clear over here. And Brandon's like, yeah, okay, I want to see the light bulb go off though, and you know, in his head. And I'm like, okay, I'll put a light bulb in the scene and it'll go off, you know. And he's like, no, I didn't mean literally, but then I did it literally in the film, you know. And it's fun, you know. So there was, you know, and so and if I disagreed with something, you know, we talked about casting, we talked about everything. And if I said something, I mean, he really listened. And like if I made a point and I disagreed with him, and he listened and he goes, okay, I get it, and moves on. And it's really rare that you work with an executive that, you know, had a whole network to deal with every, you know, issue, and would take the time out with two young filmmakers, unproven, never made a film,
and giving you his undivided attention and just in that level of sort of detail that he had.
Yeah, it was great. So,
That's awesome.
Yeah, miss that guy. He was great.
Nice. And how was it working with John Cusack and Tim Robbins? They were both so early in their careers, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely like, at that point, all of they were really, aggressively trying to break all the rules, that they could. They were coming from avant-garde theater, and John had, played some, I guess you'd say, sort of like teen idol roles or teen, comedy roles.
Was Say Anything, was that before Say Anything or after Say Anything?
Uh, they had filmed Say Anything, but it wasn't out yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Um, so we had to wait for them to each finish a movie, but they really wanted to like kill it and just really take this opportunity to like go all out. And that was difficult because they were into improv, theater,
Right.
outrageous comedy, and we were combining non-actors with certain roles, like the Swanky Modes,
Yeah.
which was a soul group that had Sam Moore and Junior Walker, never acted before in their lives, and so
great.
John and
Yeah.
Tim would want 20 takes of everything.
Yeah.
22 takes. And I'd be like, and that was when we were shooting film, and I could only afford short ends. So I'm like, I got it. No, let's do it again. Like, no, let's do it again. And it was kind of maddening because, sometimes your first take would actually be the best, but you're then chasing something that you don't.
And you got to make the day. You're shooting on film, so your shooting ratio, you can't afford to have like a crazy high shooting ratio.
Exactly. And we would go like an hour over every day into overtime, and it was driving, Pete nuts. And I mean,
Was Pete the cinematographer?
No, he was the producer on
Oh, the
it.
producer. Gotcha.
And, and then they would get all excited, John and Tim, and want to improv with the, Sam and Junior. And Sam and Junior only memorized their lines from the last words of,
Oh, right. They're using John and Tim's cue to like say their lines.
Yeah, and John and Sam and Junior would just sort of look at each other and then repeat the same line again, like they didn't know what to do, And so it was wacky, for sure, in that way, And we had like Don Cornelius. We had all kinds of,
Was Don Cornelius the guy that played the ones that made them do the videos on spec?
Yeah, Mo Fuzz.
Mo Fuzz. He was great.
He was supposed to be. He was written as like an old Jewish guy, who owned a record label, for 30 years, and was just. And Vicki Thomas was our casting director, and she said, how about Don Cornelius, who I'd grown up with, watching Soul Train, and I was like, yeah, I mean, it couldn't have been farther from who I wrote for the role.
He was so good in it.
But he was so good, and he came in. He had his driver. He had the Rolls Royce. He parked in front. We were casting at our downtown warehouse office, and he'd come in and in like $1,000 silk suit and have an interview, and we're like, yeah, we want to hire you, but we can't afford to do your wardrobe, like, can you just bring your own clothes, because nothing we can afford is as nice as what you wear. And he kind of looked at us like, yeah, okay.
I love what he says. He's like, after they do the first 2 videos on spec, he's like, it's okay. It's time for the trilogy. And they're just like, we're out of here. But there's definitely that kind of thing. Like, was that, because I come from that sort of background of, especially when I was first getting started, like I was filming, there's a guy, God rest his soul, Paul Palumbo. There's like, they used to own pastry shops in New York City. And the first thing that I ever filmed as a videographer, as like a paid thing, was filming a concert, like of these like Italian singers outside of Paul Palumbo's pastry shops on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. And so doing all kinds of like whatever I could say, I was just saying yes to everything, you know?
That's totally what that's about, totally what that's about. And I just remember, I mean, the trilogy and all that came from the, push that MTV was making, and some of the record companies, and like those executives who they had no, background in filmmaking, but they got a buzzword like production value. Like we want production value,
Oh my God, I
and
know
so they
exactly
would
what you're
just
talking
constantly like you'd say something, something artistic or something that worked for the film, and no, we need more production value. You need more, extras and more explosions and more, wardrobe. And, it was all about, what could you, how could you heighten the experience for the
it's,
artist?
I've had that kind of experience. I worked at a big Fortune 500 company where I was a filmmaker, like making content for them, making video content for like their social media channels and that kind of thing. And I remember at one meeting, they showed us some videos, and same thing. These people didn't have a production background. Good people, by the way. Like like I'm not knocking them as individuals, but they just didn't really have a sense of what it took to make content. And I was kind of like a one-man band, like filming, directing, editing, pushing this cart full of gear, and like in this office in Westchester, New York, and just like filming all kinds of documentary-esque sort of things. And I remember one time they showed me a video of somebody that literally went to like the Amazon, and they were around like these exotic animals. They're like, how do we make content that's as good as this? I'm like, well, we're in an office and we primarily film people in this office, and they're like out in the wilderness and like they have like these cool looking exotic animals. So it's like going to be very different.
It was always Joe. I remember Joey Ramone
Shout out
once
to
when
the
I
Ramones.
shout out to Ramones. I was doing a Ramones video, and Joey is incredibly shy and OCD, and that, like won't wash his hair, and it's like, and he and I'm like, okay, you're punk rock, you are punk rock, and that's, and you're looking very punk rock, and we're on St. Mark's Avenue and
I used to
shooting,
hang
and
out in St. Mark's a lot. And I
yeah,
told Bill over the phone, by the way, that I met when I was 14 years old. I met Joey Ramone very briefly at a concert, and I thought it was like the coolest moment in my life.
yeah, and Joey, yeah, so I'm thinking like, okay, you're punk rock, and you don't care about anything, and he turned to me and goes, you know, I know Billy Idol, and he doesn't look that good in person, so why don't you make me look that good, like Billy Idol? And I'm like, Joey, you're not Billy Idol, I can't do that. I just got a camera and that's so
That's incredible.
it's always like expectation versus, reality and what you think. And, it was a fun time, but it is funny when you actually are in that moment where you're supposed to explain like that's not reality. We have to we have to have a
Yeah.
little reality check here.
So you directed, like speaking of which, you directed some incredible music videos back in the day. Like you mentioned Suicidal Tendencies, and you did videos for the Ramones, and quite eclectic, like Lamb of God, Megadeth, and Hank Williams Jr., even the Backstreet Boys, and more recently St. John, which I was impressed that you did the St. John,
Yeah,
the Roses video, which I thought was
yeah,
like a super cool video.
that was a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you first start doing music videos?
Well, I had gone to every film school, I think. I went to SUNY Purchase, I went to NYU and UCLA and San Francisco Art Institute, and then I finished at the American Film Institute. I never, like, I would go for a year and then decide I wanted to work and I'd leave or go, so, but when I finished at AFI, I had no connections in the film business. I grew up in the Bronx. I went to
You grew up in the Bronx?
Avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No way. I grew up in the Bronx too. Yeah.
There you go. And
I didn't know you were a Bronx guy. That's pretty cool.
yeah, I am. Yeah, and I went to Bronx High School of Science.
Oh, nice. Which part of the Bronx did you grow up in?
Riverdale.
Oh, okay, great. I was in Riverdale very recently, filming a violinist. That's shout out to Keanu Muse, did the score for one of my latest projects.
Wow. Well, as far as I know, it's still kind of similar to when I grew up.
Yeah, it's a nice area actually.
Yeah, it hasn't changed all that much. So I was, kind of suburban kid. It's New York City kid, but from that area, and here I am in Los Angeles, and no connections. I graduated from AFI, and so I had some skills. I hoped I'd made some little films on Betamax there, and started working, doing anything I could, being a grip, a gaffer, assistant camera, shooting, short films, and I was getting some work on music videos, as an assistant camera. We were shooting 16 millimeter at the time, because that's the only kind of work you could get at that time. Like, you weren't in the union. There was no way to get into the union. I thought I wanted to be a cinematographer because I was a photographer growing up. And I was trying to work my way in, and music videos were kind of the only outlet I saw where you could, you didn't have to be related to somebody or know someone to get a job,
And stuff.
Yeah, so I was working as an assistant camera on some of these, and I thought, well, they were cool and they were good, the directors, and I was like, kind of like, well, I think I can't do much worse than they did. I thought, like, okay, I get it. I see what they're doing, and I know I could probably do that. So I, just like Josh and Ivan, decided to start my own little music video company, having no connections, and looking around for bands that, I could work with that would have some money to pay for film stock and camera rentals and things like that. And my first video I did was for a band called the 3 O'Clock, and they were part of what they called the Paisley Underground, with like the Bangles and groups like that, and they were just in the LA scene, they were just underground LA scene, and it was a very small label out of a garage called Frontier Records. Lisa Fancher, she was running it, and they had another band called Suicidal Tendencies, and they lived in Venice, and I lived in Venice, and they said, hey, do you want to do a video for this band? And that was the first one, and I did that one. We kind of talked about that.
Institutionalized, which is iconic song. Definitely. And definitely on mixtapes of mine back in the day.
Yeah, and that was crazy. I ended up doing a lot of videos with those guys, and kind of got signed to a bigger music video company than our little one, and started having access to real bands, and with real budgets, and still kind of working on anything that would come that I could get. So it was, it got very eclectic, Grandmaster Flash rap, or country music, Hank Jr., or, weird music like, Geggy Tah and Warner Brothers. It just all, but basically if they wanted somebody that was kind of had a, sense of humor, or do something a little different, or could get along with, difficult artists, they we'd get those kind of gigs.
And that's how you met the Ramones, like because you first
Yeah.
worked with Suicidal Tendencies and stuff.
Yeah, I think Warner Brothers thought, that I had the right aesthetic.
Were you into that kind of music too? Like, did you like punk and?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, when I was going to the San Francisco Art Institute, punk was a cool scene up there, and then moved down to LA, and there was bands like X, and it was a little different. I mean, I wasn't so much into New York punk
like the New
scene.
York
I was a
hardcore
little
sort of stuff.
young.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
How
I
would
did
you
like
how
it.
would you
I mean,
categorize it as different? Like, what was the difference to you? Was it
well, it was there was a punk rock aesthetic more than the music, so to speak. So you had all these bands like Wall of Voodoo and the Blasters and X and um, what was Fear, and there was all these bands in LA that would play at the same clubs, but the music style was like very different. The Blasters were rockabilly,
yeah.
but they were best friends with, X, and X had some country roots, and then bands like Fear and, guys like Darby Crash, they were really like thrash and spitting on each other and jumping into the crowd and moshing, and so there was a mix, but everybody would be hanging out in the same club, and they would play on the same bill, or you'd see them at Cantor's afterwards or someplace. And so it was a very inclusive scene. There was it had to do with fashion and attitude more than the sound of the music, so to speak.
I see what you're saying.
You know,
Yeah.
all of Voodoo was definitely like cinematic and in their style of music. And and up in San Francisco, there was bands like the Dead Kennedys and Pearl Harbor and the Explosions, and uh, what was her name? Deborah's band that was in the Art Institute with me. That was the Waitresses. I mean, there was bands that was they were just. I think it wasn't so much a genre as it was an attitude
Yeah.
you brought to your music. It was anti-corporate rock,
Right.
you know.
Right. Yeah. But
So I like the world, but
yeah.
not,
like,
but
how would you describe the vibe at CBGB's at that time? Because I came into it later on, because I'm a little bit younger than you. So I was going to shows in like from the mid '90s. So
yeah.
on.
I mean, CBGB's, I remember that era, I was 17 and like from the Bronx or whatever, going down to CBGB's, was dangerous.
Right.
I just remember it just being very dangerous, like you could get killed. You go down to the Bowery, and, I remember bottles flying, and, guys shooting up, and it just being, in
Like
the street or
a seedy
whatever.
sort of place. Yeah.
Seedy, very seedy. You
Yeah.
didn't know.
What was gonna happen.
It was scary.
Yeah.
And I think other bands thought that the Ramones were going to beat them up. Literally. And there was like, I thought there was a it was scary stuff. And I had been, growing up, I was into at that time I was into jazz music. My friends had gone to music and art, and I would go to see jazz concerts, and Carnegie Hall, and Bill Evans, and clubs, and then I liked Steely Dan, because that was, to me, that was, and to my friends, that was really like beat generation lyrics, talking about weird stuff, anti-establishment kind of stuff with kind of beat beat poetry and in their lyrics, and then a jazz kind of through line, and not nowadays you listen to it and it seems completely different.
Yeah.
But I mean, I liked Led Zeppelin, but I was not like into what most of the kids, at that time were into, like Led Zeppelin and Bad Company and Allman Brothers, and there was definitely a through line,
Or they were into disco, right? Like it was like
or disco. Yeah, well, disco. Yeah, disco was coming out right at that time, and and I liked Motown and funk. Parliament, Funkadelic was what I was into in high school, and again, that was again a little different than Bee Gees and stuff like that.
Yeah. Did you this is a random question, but did you see Scorsese's Mean Streets in the theater when it came out at the time?
No, no, I didn't.
'Cause there's one scene where there is like two guys from Riverdale that are buying fireworks
really?
for these gangster guys. They're like, "Where are you guys from?" They're like, "We're from Riverdale." And I just remember, I just was like, I wonder if Bill saw that in the theater when it came out.
No, no. I mean, I vaguely remember that seeing it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think anybody would know outside of New York what that meant.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of things like that. And I was watching, by the way, I was watching Car 54, Where Are You, last night with my wife, and we were both cracking up the whole time. It's a very silly but very funny movie with Dave Johansen
Yeah, from the New York Dolls.
from
Yeah.
the New York Dolls, yeah, and also known as Buster Poindexter. Um, and you know what? It's funny because I remember seeing commercials for that when I was a kid. Like that's like the first, like that movie had a wide release, right? Like because I remember seeing it when I was a kid, basically, like commercials for that, like posters, that whole thing.
Well, it had an odd release. It was. I remember we were in a meeting and at Orion, and they were like, "Okay, we're planning to release it. We can release it, in whatever it was 3 weeks or and the release schedule, and we're opening up against nothing. It's going to be amazing. We can put all our money in this first weekend ad blitz because there's no competition." And I was like, "Oh, okay." They said, like, yeah, the only other film opening that weekend, that's comedy or whatever that could compete against us is this film, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and who's Jim Carrey, he's nobody, and we're gonna destroy him. And I was like thinking, like, well, I actually think I saw the trailer, and I think it's pretty funny, and I think I know from Living Color, and
Yeah, they totally underestimated Jim Carrey on that one, huh?
Bill, we're the experts. Don't worry, we got this one. We got this. We're gonna kill that Ace Ventura Pet Detective. Who's gonna go to see that? Pets and animals, and no one's gonna see that. And it came out, and it destroyed everybody that weekend. Like that was the only film anybody went to see. And the next weekend, twice as many people saw it, and it created his whole career.
Oh yeah, it was wildly popular. I think I was in middle school when that came out.
Yeah,
That was a big deal.
I kind of remember, like, guys, I think
Told you so, guys.
I think you picked it wrong for the weekend, So yeah, so I think they just killed us, and after that, like,
Oh man.
just fell out of the theaters.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Oh, also a random question, because you directed the video for "I Want to Be Sedated" by the Ramones, but it was after it was. I think I looked it up. It came out in the 80s, right? Like it was like at least 10 years or so after the original song came out. Is that right?
Yeah, it was for a greatest hits. They
Cool.
had never had a video for that song, and they were putting out the greatest hits of the Ramones, and so they wanted to do a video for that one. So
Yeah, it's a cool video.
thank you. Yeah. Mhm.
Nice. And how'd you like working with those guys in general?
I love those guys. I mean, I was closest to Joey, but I was, friendly with all of them. Um, and but they were, very difficult to work with. Uh, they'd show up on set, as I said, and Johnny would walk up to me and says, "When could I leave?" The first thing he would say. Was uncomfortable, did not want to do it.
Yeah, you told me over the phone that about his OCD, and then I was looking it up, and I didn't realize how literal you were being. I didn't realize that he like literally had obsessive compulsive disorder. Like it was like a very like major.
Yeah, Joey was super quiet and didn't say anything. Johnny was like, I don't want to be here. Dee Dee and, was kind of the most fun, but he could be out of it. He was sometimes high when he would come on and then, the other drummers, depending on the years. But,
Right,
but I love those guys. They were great. I mean, I ended up, being friendly with all of them. Um, they all, died too
before their
soon.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so now we're gonna move to the second portion of the podcast where we talk about two movie scenes from each guest, and one is going to be from tape heads that you directed, which is really cool.
Okay.
And the scene in question is when Ivan and Josh, John Cusack and Tim Robbins, they're in the bar and they order a drink, and then the bartender has to do a sobriety test, and he makes them do the alphabet backwards, and then they do it perfectly, which I remember just cracking up about when I first saw that. I just thought it was really funny and clever. So maybe you
Yeah.
could mention something about that scene and directing,
Well,
making that scene.
that scene, when a lot of the great scenes that I like, they're doing a lot of different things at the same time. I
Right.
mean,
Like the
they're
swanky
working on a
modes were
lot of
there, and then they left, and, you know, they sort of got
right. So
distracted in
you've
that moment.
got sort of subtext going and other action going, and the audience thinks that one thing's going to happen, and something else happens, and that surprises the audience, and it also even surprises the characters themselves. So, that scene, uh, performed a lot of things at the same time, which is why I kind of like it. And also, some of the things that end up being, you know, re- restrictions on what you can do, for instance, end up actually adding creatively to the scene. So, uh, the question was in my mind, like, okay, well, let's give them, first of all, I want to do a commentary against, mothers against drunk driving, which was, they would, it was a very, there was a lot of movements at that time. They had like people
Dare.
wanting to
There was
distribute.
Dare. I remember like people had their shirts that said,
Yeah, right. Your mind on drugs is a an egg frying, and they all had like these sort of like
like
lame
sensationalist.
ways of talking to kids, talking to about real issues, and so, but we couldn't get approved to use mothers against drunk driving, so because we get sued probably for
Yeah.
making fun of it. So we just changed it to Brothers Against Drunk Driving, and Cy Richardson played the bartender. It was very and I had him play very straight, and then you wanted him to and then they're like underage drinking anyway, in the scene, and so I wanted to play on that, and then give and have some impossible task that they were able to
Like nobody would normally be
Nobody
able
would
to
do
do
that.
that sober, never
Yeah.
mind drunk.
Yeah, exactly. And to say the audience, I mean, it's ridiculous because those kind of tests are ridiculous to do when you're sober. And,
Yeah.
you know, so then I wanted to play against convention. So actually teaching John and Tim to do it backwards was like really difficult. You know, they had to really learn, and they didn't even like to learn their lines, you know, but then to do that, but then you take it to another level and you say, okay, give me the sign language, you know, for each letter as you go. So that part of the making the fun of the scene is to just amp it up, keep amping up the expectations for the audience. So we added in, you know, the phonetic, you know, the sign language for each letter, which then they had to, you know, memorize as well. So the audience expectation is that they're not going to do it whatsoever. And
Right. And
you
then
know,
they do it.
we actually have them do it, and they did it, and they killed it, you know, and they actually did it, and then you could play with the reaction, you know, are you gonna underplay it with the bartender, like, yeah, okay, cool, you know, he's not gonna get blown away like, oh my God, you know, you did that, so then you had that, but during that same time, when they achieved this accomplishment, you know, their goal of meeting the swanky modes, you see in the background that they walked out and they you know, they blew their chance. And so you want to have a bunch of things going on at the same time in the scenes that if you're able to, where you can exceed expectations and, you know, make the audience give them something to think about, you know, and have fun with it.
And who was it? Who was the band that was it the Deftones, or was it Fishbone? I forget.
That was Fishbone.
Fishbone,
yeah.
right.
But they
Fishbone, when they played that song in the venue, I think that's such a cool, memorable moment of the film.
Well, so Fishbone was a band that was friends of ours. Again, we were talking about punk rock, and you know, they were an all black band playing punk rock, funk, and everything. You know, and again, it was
Almost like the Bad Brains were.
yeah, Bad Brains. I think in New York were doing the same kind of thing, but they weren't really thinking like, oh, I got to break into the punk rock scene. It's just that's who they were. They were living. They were teenagers at the time. They couldn't even get into the clubs, you know, that they were playing. Like they had to stay in the dressing room because they were too young to actually be in the clubs. But I would be hanging out at clubs, and I was friendly with them. And Jane's Addiction and those bands, and those are also part of the punk. I guess I didn't mention them. And and the Chili Peppers yeah.
Oh yeah, they're great.
Yeah, I should have mentioned all those bands. That's what I'm saying. They all were different sounds, but
I see what you're saying. There
we
was
we knew each other. We hung.
You felt like there's more of a camaraderie in LA than there was in New York. I think it depends on the circumstance too, because like, I mean, like at the time when I grew up in New York, the scene got splintered into different sort of factions. Like there was like chaos punk, then there was New York hardcore, there was like the ska scene, there was street punk oi bands and stuff like that. But I felt like there was definitely a camaraderie of, you know, like, you know, a lot of friends of, you know, and like I would know people from all over. People were like, how do you know people from Brooklyn and Queens and New Jersey? I'm like, oh, through like hanging out at CBGBs in these different places. And they're like, oh, cool. You know?
Yeah. Well, then it was similar then, you know, I just was living in Los Angeles, but I know that they weren't at all playing the same kind of music, but it was all, they all considered themselves like, you know, punk rock, even though, you know, they weren't, you know, the Chili Peppers and Fishbone were definitely funky as shit. I mean, they could play, you know.
But they had that, I know what you mean. They had that sort of ethos, that sort of DIY kind of sensibility.
Yeah, but they could scream and they could, you know, it was the sensibility that was the same. And uh you know, so you know, when it came to scoring the movie, Brandon Tartikoff said, okay, which is you know, what composer are you going to be using for my film? And I'm like, well, the composer is actually a band called Fishbone, and they're still in high school, and they've never composed a film score before, but I want to use them. And he looked at me like, is this for real? Like these black kids with mohawks, you know, don't know anything about how to sync up, even just, syncing up a metronome with a film score and how are they going to do all this? And I'm like, no, I'm gonna get it done. And again, he said, okay,
Believe in your
and
vision.
yeah, and look, they got into fist fights during the, recording sessions, and, because they trying to, they had arguments about what to, how to get to, and, but their producer, David Kahn, was a classically trained, musician, and he could play parts on pianos to fill in, and he got them all, but back then you had a 3/4 inch tape, and you'd have to, hit record and play at the same time and watch the scene and,
Yeah.
do it live. And it was, and so then I was sitting with them one day, and they said, hey, we want to be in the film. And I said, well, yeah, I got everything's cast, and, there's no other spots in the movie for a band. There's one country western, band that's playing in a bar when Ivan and Josh walk in, but that's it. And they go, oh, that's us. We could do that. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, Ranch Bone. We could be Ranch Bone. We could be playing country western music. And so they composed that song.
I love that song that they played. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
They pulled it
Howard
off.
Beach. It's actually a protest song about the it's like the racism and the beating up the guys in Howard Beach on the bus, and it just put on, kind of singing cowboy clothes on him, and you actually see that when Angelo is like bobbing his head, his hat falls off, and his he's got a mohawk underneath there, and that was just an accident, that just happened.
That's awesome.
So they played in the bar as Ranch Bone, but it worked.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So the next film that we're going to discuss is Animal House. Animal House, the 1978 comedy classic film directed by John Landis, set in 1962, follows the misadventures of the rowdy Delta Tau Chi fraternity at Faber College, a group of outcasts and troublemakers constantly at odds with the college administration and the snobbish Omega Theta Pi fraternity. John Belushi is so great in it. And shout out to John Belushi, who is Albanian, just like I'm Albanian. So he was the first famous Albanian, I guess. So tell us about the scene that you'd like to discuss.
Oh, well, there's so many great scenes, but I think that, that scene is one that sort of inspired me, and that scene in Tapeheads that you were talking about, because again, there's just a scene where, there's a lot of expectations. They're brought up in the student court. You don't know how they're going to get out of it. They're going to get nailed, and
Double secret probation.
double secret probation, and you feel like the president, he gets out, they get the charges against them, and there's all kinds of subtext going on in the scene. Bellucci's like cutting up, going blowjob, and things like that, and again, that's like, what did he say? And then they're explaining blowjob, and you see how that reaction, but he gets up and he starts to make a defense of the actions in the way that you would expect they would do it. They would talk about hey, we didn't break any rules, we did this and that, and he's cut off immediately by a corrupt, by the corrupt, judge of the court, student judge of the court, and not given a chance, to speak to it. So at that point, the scene is over, right? They're like, okay, they're going to cut you off. You're cut off. You're the injustice, and then there's a secondary level where he says, "Hey, let me handle this. I was pre-law, and said I thought you were pre-med." He's like, "Yeah, whatever, same thing." And basically, you start to realize, okay, where is this going? So the audience doesn't really know where it's going, but that he's going to make another impassioned plea, and from there on, it's really brilliant because the other subplots and stories are woven in. Hey, I slept with your wife, like a wink and a nod by just commenting on some things that you're saying. The student body actually getting behind him when he's when he's cutting up, and then invoking like in a clever way, exceeding expectations, like, well, turning it all on the I'm not going to let you insult the United States of America and the whole college fraternity system, and we're going to walk out because of what you're doing. It was like kind of it was just so brilliant subversion of everything that the audience expects, and also doing other things at the same time, which is calling back to having screwed the girlfriends and the girlfriend of Niedermeyer or of the college president. It was really brilliant. And then, okay, so are they actually going to convince him? No, they're actually just going to walk out and bail on the whole thing. So there were so many great constructs going on, and also a great performance. But I thought that was a kind of, I think that's the kind of thing that filmmakers want to do with these great comic scenes, is always subvert expectations, always have other things going on at the same time within the scene, within the narrative of the scene, and within the text and the subtext. So that's why I thought that scene was so great. And I tried to do something similar in the scene you talked about in Tapeheads, where I'd try to have them subvert what we thought was going to happen and have other things going on in the same scene, that would play.
Oh, totally. One of my favorite scenes in Animal House is when the Delta guys go on their road trip and they stop at a roadside bar where Otis Day and the Knights are playing, and the Shout is playing, and I think it's a cool moment.
Yeah, and because it shows, you think like, hey, these guys love me. They came to our frat house and we had a great time, and now we're friends, and and then they go to an actual roadhouse where they're playing, and they couldn't be more clueless, and it couldn't be more dangerous. And it was exactly the feeling that I would get when I'd go to CBGB's. Like, anything could happen. You're way above your skis. You're way out in deeper water than you even knew. And it's great commentary on the lead characters, as well as being, great music and great fun scene. Again, brilliant scene where lots of things are going on.
For sure. And early in the movie, there's also a moment where they go and smoke weed with the professor, played by Donald Sutherland. And there's this, I only noticed it this time of watching the film, there's this little eerie moment when there's like a dissolve with Donald Sutherland's face looking sinister before they go upstairs to smoke weed. And I was like, is that an homage to Don't Look Now, the film Don't Look Now? If you see it again, you might catch it. I could be wrong, but it seemed like that, because he's got this like sort of sinister look on his face, you know. I don't know.
I mean, it may, and you don't know if, you know, Donald did that
Himself. He took it upon
consciously.
himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He may have thrown that in because that's a great film. Don't look now.
It is a great film, for sure. Well, Bill, I so appreciate you being on the podcast. Excited to see the film again when it comes out, and certainly I'll spread the word for it.
Yeah, that'll be really fun, and shout out to the Bronx, and love that.
Thank you for listening to the Film Situation podcast with your host, Zef Cota.